This is Real Life with Deb Waterbury, a real show for real people with real issues. And now, here's your host, Dr. Deb Waterbury.
Well, welcome to the next episode of Real Life with Deb Waterbury. As y'all know, we're right in the middle of our grief series. And so last week we had Bob Rill on. This week we got Bob Rill. So they did that on purpose, so you'd never have to worry about names. And I'm sure that they were thinking about that.
The marriage had to work?
It had to. So yeah. And how long y'all been married? I'm testing her right now because she's over in a corner, so you better say it right.
Well, more than 39.
Okay. All you men out there, that's not an acceptable answer.
53 years.
Okay. I'm teasing you. It would have been acceptable.
I do remember.
So 53 years of Bob and Bobbie. It had to work with names like that. So Bob and Bobbie run the Grief and Wellness Group.
Right.
I always want to say grief recovery because that's the process that you use.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But Grief and Wellness Group. And so we're doing a 4-week series on grief. Bobbie was with us last week, and we talked about what grief actually is. And so this week, Bob is with us, and he's going to be talking to us about the symptoms of grief. And then we've got 2 more weeks after this that we'll talk about some other things. Bob, you and I have just gotten to know each other a little bit more since I've been doing this show. Bobbie and I have known each other about 20 years and done things in all different realms. But the one thing I do know, and I said this last week and I'll say it every week, is that what you guys do works. And it is just such a blessing. And I've been able to not only, hear about it, but send people to you guys and then hear from them and see the changes that come as they go through the grief recovery process.
Absolutely.
It is an amazing thing. So we're going to talk this week about what the symptoms of grief are. And I think this is important because as Bobbie and I talked about last week, and as we've talked about plenty of times, a lot of people don't realize when they're actually grieving. I mean, they may name it something else or not even understand that's what grief is. And I've used the example often of just, for me in my lifetime, of thinking, not even knowing that when I was betrayed or lost relationships or whatever, that the pain I went through afterward was grief.
Absolutely.
And if I had gotten the help I needed to actually get through that grief then, it probably wouldn't have affected my relationships afterwards like it did.
Undoubtedly.
I might have had more friends. So the symptoms, how does a person really know that they're experiencing grief, Bob?
Well, there are a number of things that come to mind. One is they lose interest in things that used to really give them spark, and things that were a joy to them, give them a pleasure,
right, and
so forth. And then often a feeling of being down. The thing that I think of is when we used to live in Michigan, we had long winters, a lot of snow, and everything.
I lived in Michigan for a couple of years. I remember that snow.
Okay. And they used to call it cabin fever in the wintertime. As a matter of fact, people got so tired of being inside and sequestered into their homes and that. One of the greatest, Michigan's a big boating community.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the biggest sales, most sales that were made in the boating industry were in February.
Really?
People would get out, go to the indoor arena where the sailboats and boats were displayed. And
it gave them like this sense of it's coming. We're going to get out of this.
Right. Yeah. Another 3 weeks and the snow will be starting to go and so forth. And of course, that's just the opposite here in Tucson.
Right.
We have our wintertime in the summer, our summertime in the wintertime when we can get out and hike and do things that are there. And so, and that's what this virus thing has kind of done. It's kind of been a thief for us that we've been sequestered during the time that we should be out playing.
Maybe this is what I've been grieving. I've been saying that I'm just mad. maybe I've just been grieving because you're right. For us, I know I have a son who lives in Connecticut, and his problem, they couldn't have gone out anyway. I mean, it's so darn cold and it's still snowing there. Us, we've just been, but it's beautiful outside and we can't go do all the things that we're used to doing and having outdoor activities. So we missed it because now it's hot and there we go.
Mm-hmm. And then there's that feeling of being helpless or hopeless and not being able to, kind of the lost feeling and so forth. Also, people lose sleep when they're going through a grieving circumstance.
Right, right.
And either they sleep too much, or the other flip side of the coin, they can't sleep at all.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a feeling a lot of times that they're not able to control what their environment is.
Right.
Loss of appetite, which goes both ways as well.
Right.
They either decide that I'm not hungry, or they go to the refrigerator every 10 minutes to look for something that they didn't see there before.
Exactly. Fill that void.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the flip side of that is both that. So, but I think one of the main things is a lack of concentration, not being able to focus, and not being able to enjoy the things, reading and things like that, and actually clarify there.
Well, Bob, so everything you're naming right now, if I were, listening to somebody who was saying they had all those things, or if I were having those things, I would immediately go to the doctor, and probably he would give me some antidepressants. I mean, it sounds like depression.
That's right.
So what is the difference? I mean, or how are they alike, or how can we even distinguish between them?
Well, you can distinguish between them because most of us have an awareness of our physical body. We get an annual physical, and we get things that are know where our body stands and so forth, what stimulates it, what depresses it, and things like that. And know when we have things coming on that don't belong there. Things like diabetes and things of that nature that we keep a check on. And so the difference really is the fact that probably a physician would be the first one to visit. But unless he has an idea of what everything is going on in our life,
true,
and unless we tell him that we have had this event that has caused us to suddenly feel differently than what we had been enjoying the joy of things, that probably is what he would do. A lot of physicians do refer to us because they recognize that it's not something that's a physical position.
And it's been something has naturally brought the feelings on.
Right.
And I think that maybe for depression, if I understand it correctly, sometimes there really isn't any event. It's just if it's a physical thing, then it just might happen. Whereas grief there is a reason. You have a reason to grieve.
There are a lot of things that kind of trigger us. Grief is so accumulative. And what we do is generally stuff it down and try and get by it. Well, when it needs to be dealt with, it starts to bubble up. And something will trigger that, whether it's a smell, a sight of another person, a photograph, and so forth. And so it can be delayed in that sense, so that it's not something that immediately come. But what we need to understand is the fact that there is a difference between depression and grieving experience, because the grief will actually be able to be tied to an event. Our subconscious holds everything that we know, see, and have heard. And so it gives us hints as to what is on our mind and so forth. And especially on a sleepless night. Those things will come up and they'll haunt us or remind us and so forth. And if we decide to push it back down. Which, you're right, tends to be the natural reaction, is that we tend to want to do that. Well, what is if a person is feeling, because they're not going to feel all those things, I reckon, all the time, right? That's just a set of things they may or may not feel at different times. If they're experiencing grief, what should they do? What should a person do? I mean, as you said, it's always wise, and I say this to my clients as well, you need to go to the doctor and make sure there's nothing physical going on. But then what do they do after that? Well, then they probably would be wise to come to a counselor or some meeting to find out whether they have something that was in their background that's causing their grieving circumstances to be brought to the forefront. What happens with stress and grief is we get an overload of our cortisol. It changes our whole body chemistry is what it does.
Right.
And a lot of people counteract that by medicating themselves. Food's a big medication. Alcohol,
drugs,
and those kinds of drugs. But what we need to understand is if we're not getting those happy drugs into our system to balance us, then we're what's the source of that?
Right.
And there's always got to be some sort of event that kind of tickles the conscience with regard to an understanding of whether it's that or whether it's just a total chemical imbalance.
Yes. And I suppose it's just a difference between putting a Band-Aid or a numbing agent instead of actually getting to it and giving the hope for getting through it. Because I think that's what, in my experience, especially from the people that I've sent to you guys, it is that experience they have of getting to it and then getting through it. And then there's actually a release as opposed to just numbing it so you don't feel it.
That's right.
Because it doesn't go away that way.
Well, people try to postpone it. And I'm not sure what their strategy is behind it, because once you go through a process of self-discovery, which the grief recovery method is a self-discovery.
Right.
It's such a relief. It's so you become so less burdened.
Yes, but I think it's the fear of feeling it. I think that people just don't want to feel it, and it's just that's what I believe it is a mask to the actual healing that one that definitely that you guys give. So as we wind this up this next time, I mean for this session, Bob, what would be your last words you would say to someone who, if they're listening right now and they know there's been an event, they've had a move, they've had a death, there's been any of those things that we talk about that could cause, that changes their life so that they've experienced any of these, what would you say to them?
Get help. Don't suffer the embarrassment of waiting.
Yes.
Waiting is the worst thing that we can do. The one thing that I've discovered, observed probably is a better word, through the course of the years that I've worked with grief recovery, is the fact that usually people come to us after the first year of an event. Well, things are going to change. Everything's going to be better after the first. Yeah. And then about a third of the way through the next year, they discovered it hasn't changed. All those same feelings and difficulties continue to come. And usually about 1.5 to 2 years, there's a danger for them to become so identified with the pain that's associated with that's all they can focus on.
Oh, yeah.
We've had a number of people who have had loss of very close members, family members, and perhaps waited 5 years in order to seek help, to the point where they become so paralyzed that they weren't able to function.
And you don't want to get to that.
Absolutely.
So your advice would just be, reach out.
Absolutely.
And get the help. And especially when you have organizations like the Grief and Wellness Group that can help you through these things, it doesn't make sense to fester, and because it will not get better. You might stuff it and you might not see it for a minute. You might not see it, but it will be visible and it will get more and more visible until you are debilitated by that. Well, thank you, Bob. I really appreciate it. We've got 2 more weeks that we're going to be coming together for our grief special, our whole grief special series. We've got your wife next week. Bobbie will be back with us, and then you're going to wind us up at the last session.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. So if you have any questions, obviously we have all of their information underneath this video. We'd also love your comments. Again, their website is griefthethief.com, and the number is underneath there as well if you want to get in touch with them. God bless you all, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Real Life with Deb Waterbury. I hope it's been a blessing to you as much as it was to me. If you want any of my books or information on articles or any of my speaking engagements, you can go to my website at debwaterbury.com. God bless you.